In recently opened Pentagon archives, certain files appear that were never meant to surface. Their pages refer to research initiatives not listed in any public record of aerial investigations. The wording is precise, describing programs established in parallel but outside of known oversight. In several places, the documents mention advanced materials under restricted custody. Dates of creation match intervals when official reports were silent. Analysts reviewing the material point out that these gaps align too closely to be coincidence. The discovery alters the known timeline of U.S. government attention to unidentified phenomena. What was once considered a single track of inquiry now reveals multiple hidden channels. The documents specify vault storage for items not traced to domestic supply chains. No production records accompany the entries, and origin is consistently marked, not identified. The classification levels assigned to these vaults exceed those of standard weapons testing. Access lists are redacted, but remaining notes indicate only a handful of individuals were cleared. Annotations in the margins suggest ongoing transfers over several years. The controlled handling implies the material was considered sensitive at the highest level. No mention of these vaults appears in public-facing investigations of the same period. Several of the records are stamped with unusual routing codes. Analysts cross-checked these codes against known defense projects and found no matches. One file notes that review committees were bypassed entirely, with approval delegated to unnamed offices. Such irregularities show an effort to keep these programs insulated from routine scrutiny. In one section, a memo warns against discussing the existence of these holdings outside inner channels. The lack of attribution to any known laboratory reinforces the sense of compartmentalization. These findings make clear that the activity was not part of a transparent research agenda. When compared with official statements from the same years, the contrast is evident. Public briefings insisted that no unexplained material was under government study. Yet internal records now show that controlled analysis was already underway. The divergence suggests deliberate management of information. Some reviewers have called this the first undeniable marker of a hidden archive system. The files themselves do not explain why secrecy was maintained, but the structure of their classification shows intent. Every detail points toward programs designed to remain concealed indefinitely. The sequence of dates provides another layer of context. Gaps in public reports coincide with sudden bursts of classified entries. In one instance, a year with no official UFO references shows multiple vault logs of incoming consignments. This correlation is difficult to dismiss. It reveals that the absence of public acknowledgement did not mean inactivity. Instead, it indicates a deliberate effort to conduct research behind closed doors. The documents bridge what had long appeared to be unexplained silences in the record. Marginal notes from reviewers inside the Pentagon give subtle clues. One analyst wrote of properties not reproducible in current facilities. Another entry mentions integrity beyond conventional metallurgy. Though vague, the language signals that the materials were out of step with known technology. These fragments do not provide final answers, but they add weight to suspicions of extraordinary origin. The notations are consistent across multiple files, suggesting a shared internal assessment. The presence of coded designations is equally significant. Each program is labeled with a short alphanumeric tag unrelated to known projects. These tags recur in logistics records, hinting at movement of materials across different bases. No official ledger explains the codes, but their repetition implies continuity. This kind of internal shorthand is often used when programs are too sensitive to be named outright. Tracking these references reveals a network of activity beyond what has ever been admitted. Analysts who studied the release observe the controlled phrasing. Terms such as anomalous, restricted, and not attributed recur with unusual frequency. The careful choice of words signals an attempt to describe without revealing. It mirrors techniques used in other highly classified programs where exposure must be minimized. The textual patterns themselves become evidence of deliberate concealment. To outside readers, the records may appear incomplete, but to trained reviewers, they tell a coherent story of hidden oversight. Every page confirms that research extended far beyond the public view. Vaults, materials, coded programs, and restricted notes all converge into a consistent narrative. What once seemed like rumor is now documented practice. The revelations do not yet explain the nature of the materials or their ultimate purpose, but they demonstrate that the foundation of a secret system was in place. This baseline leads directly into the next phase of inquiry, where the concealed studies themselves come into focus. In the deeper sections of the archive, technical reports describe examinations of objects identified only as non-terrestrial. The phrasing is deliberate, avoiding specific origin while marking them outside conventional categories. Laboratory teams were tasked with analyzing alloys and fabricated devices unlike known production lines. Notes reference testing of density, stress resistance, and microstructural anomalies. Results showed properties inconsistent with commercial or military standards of the time. One summary states the samples held structural integrity beyond conventional metallurgy. The assessments were logged under high classification and distributed only within a narrow circle. These were not treated as speculative curiosities but as controlled studies of unusual matter. Several files include diagrams of lattice arrangements not seen in available alloys. Researchers highlighted patterns suggesting engineered design at scales difficult to reproduce with known methods. Some pages carry marks of frustration, with remarks such as, "No current capacity to replicate." Instruments registered responses outside expected thermal and electromagnetic behavior. Analysts noted their findings but recommended suspension of public discussion. A cover sheet stamped "Never for release" makes the intent clear. The information was not meant to circulate beyond the compartment that held it. One set of documents describes a sequence of experiments in which fragments were subjected to high-temperature endurance. The samples did not degrade in ways predicted by metallurgy references of the period. Testing logs note, "No detectable fatigue after extended exposure." These results stood out against baseline controls, which showed expected breakdown. Scientists debated possible explanations but recorded no satisfactory match with terrestrial alloys. The reports end abruptly, with subsequent pages withheld from the release. The break in continuity suggests further work that remains undisclosed. Beyond metals, researchers cataloged unusual devices received alongside the fragments. Technical staff attempted to disassemble components but found bonding mechanisms resistant to conventional tools. Notes describe circuitry with no familiar layout, and in one case a crystalline structure integrated with conductive pathways. The terminology is clinical, avoiding speculation, but the underlying message is difficulty in understanding origin or function. These devices were entered into storage under restricted inventory codes. Their existence was shielded even within the classified record itself. Funding annotations show the studies were not large in scale but were maintained steadily. Small budgets were allocated under generic project numbers with no reference to content. This allowed continuity without drawing attention. The persistence of entries across multiple years confirms that the effort was not abandoned quickly. Instead, the line of inquiry was quietly sustained. Even when public programs were declared closed, these files show testing continued behind classified walls. Scientists assigned to the projects noted professional isolation. Correspondence reveals frustration that results could not be shared or published. One researcher remarked that peer review impossible under present restrictions. This ensured that independent validation never occurred. The scientific method was effectively confined, with observations recorded but never exposed to wider critique. The compartmentalization preserved secrecy but limited open analysis. That choice appears deliberate, prioritizing control over discovery. Patterns in the documents indicate selective reporting. Certain results were circulated internally while others were locked down. Memos stress, limit distribution to cleared offices only. In some cases, data sheets are listed in indexes but the attachments are missing. These gaps are consistent with later practices of withholding sensitive results. What remains visible today is only a partial record of what was studied. The omissions themselves speak to the intent behind the archive. The controlled language throughout suggests caution in how the findings were framed. Terms such as anomalous or not reproducible recur with consistency. This restrained phrasing signals a policy of description without explanation. Analysts reviewing the files now see this as an early step in a larger system of concealment. By limiting conclusions, officials maintained ambiguity while continuing classified study. The balance kept sensitive material secure while presenting little to outside observers. The pattern is strict: secure the site, remove material, and silence discussion. These measures match the broader theme of concealment visible throughout the archive. Supporting documents also reveal logistics coordination at unusual scale. Aircraft allocations bypassed routine scheduling, drawing directly from central command pools. Fuel and maintenance requests were submitted under emergency status, despite no recorded crisis. Cargo transfer receipts list only weight and volume, never contents. Handwritten annotations sometimes mark the shipments as priority vault. The secrecy extended from field recovery to final storage. Every step was shielded from standard oversight. Personnel records are heavily redacted, but some fragments remain. References to elite composite team suggest members were drawn from multiple branches. Skills listed include ordnance disposal, materials handling, and technical analysis. The cross-domain composition indicates preparation for diverse conditions at retrieval sites. These were not random units but carefully assembled groups. Their mandate was both recovery and containment. Such organization confirms that reports were taken seriously at the highest levels. Communication trails show that these teams reported directly to offices outside the normal chain of command. Routine investigative bureaus were bypassed. The absence of intermediaries prevented leaks and ensured rapid execution. One directive emphasizes that external inquiry is to be deflected. The wording signals awareness of scrutiny and the need to control information. The unusual reporting structure itself becomes evidence of intentional secrecy. Analysts reviewing the records note the consistency of procedures over time. Despite shifts in administration and policy, the same rapid response model recurs. Locations change, but the format of the missions remains. This persistence indicates that the effort was institutionalized rather than experimental. The program survived across decades, adapted to changing contexts but never dismantled. The endurance of these practices is as telling as the operations themselves. When compared to public statements of the same period, contradictions emerge. Officials dismiss sightings as misidentifications or routine events. Yet, internal documents confirm mobilization within hours of those same incidents. The duality is striking: outward denial paired with urgent internal action. This contrast sets the stage for recognizing a broader policy of concealment. It is within this gap between words and actions that the hidden pattern becomes visible. The archive makes clear that rapid response teams were real, active, and systematically deployed. Their operations carried hallmarks of priority missions normally reserved for national security emergencies. Material was collected, transported, and locked away without public trace. The records close without explanation of what became of the recovered cargo. What follows in the archive is the emergence of an unmistakable pattern: denial on the surface, research behind closed doors. This transition marks the next phase of the investigation. Review of the internal files against public records shows a stark divide. During the same years when vault entries and rapid response missions were logged, official press statements claimed nothing unusual was under investigation. Spokespersons repeatedly assured that sightings had prosaic explanations. Yet the archives confirm that secured transports and controlled studies were already underway. This divergence stands out as deliberate. Analysts conclude the two tracks were designed to operate in parallel without intersecting. The structure of secrecy depended on the appearance of denial. One declassified briefing note illustrates the method. It instructs officials to dismiss inquiries with reference to natural or human causes. The timing matches a period when retrieval logs show active deployments. The dual record makes it clear that public denials were issued while internal urgency escalated. Each line of contradiction builds the outline of a hidden policy. The consistency of the approach cannot be dismissed as coincidence. It reflects careful management of information flow. Memos from internal review committees echo this tension. Members acknowledged the volume of classified reports but stressed the need for uniform public messaging. One line reads, "External position remains negative regardless of internal assessment." This demonstrates that silence was not accidental but mandated. It created a shield around programs described elsewhere in the files. The stated priority was stability of narrative, not transparency of fact. Analysts highlight that these contradictions recur across decades. In one case, a denial was issued the same week as a documented cargo transfer to a restricted facility. In another, a spokesperson dismissed rumors of unusual debris, while logs recorded sealed shipments under coded designations. The synchronization reveals a coordinated strategy. Public comm was maintained while classified activity advanced. This cycle repeats enough times to establish intent rather than error. The contrast grows sharper when placed alongside recovered scientific notes. Laboratories marked "not reproducible" results at the same time officials declared no evidence of unusual technology. The selective communication is striking. It shows that findings were not only suppressed but actively countered with contrary statements. This strategy left the public narrative clean while the classified record accumulated evidence. The dissonance is central to understanding the archive. Files from oversight offices comment on the growing gap between what was known internally and what was admitted externally. Reviewers warn of risk if parallel tracks converge. The warning suggests concern over exposure should classified operations become linked to public reports. Recommendations urged tightening of compartmentalization. The archive demonstrates that these precautions were not just discussed but enforced. The gap was maintained intentionally as a matter of policy. Cross-referencing news archives with classified timelines adds further weight. Events dismissed as weather or conventional aircraft align with documented deployments of rapid response units. The pattern repeats too often to be disregarded. What the public saw as dismissals were actually cover for active investigation. This discovery is not based on a single incident but a chain of consistent contradictions. The record shows design, not accident. The interim summary compiled by analysts at the time reflects this dual structure. It notes restricted material storage, special team deployments, and strict public denial as interlocking elements. The language is clinical, but the implication is clear. A coordinated system existed to research quietly while projecting silence outward. This mechanism preserved secrecy for years without major breaches. The evidence within the archive confirms the method worked as intended. By tracing these patterns, one sees the emergence of a broader policy of concealment. The denial was not a response to absence of data but a deliberate mask over ongoing activity. Every line of record strengthens the case that secrecy was institutionalized. The stage is now set for examining the next layer of operations, where denial alone was no longer sufficient. In those years, a program of coordinated disinformation begins to appear in the files. Files from the late 1980s carry a different tone. Instead of simple denials, the language shifts toward active shaping of outside perception. Memoranda reference briefings prepared for external consumption, with details designed to mislead. Some of these notes mention journalists by name, identifying those most likely to pursue the subject. The guidance instructs officers to supply alternate explanations when pressed. Weather events, foreign aircraft, and classified domestic tests were all suggested as cover stories. The documents describe these efforts not as ad hoc measures but as standing procedures. In one internal report, the phrase "contain narrative spread" is underlined twice. The context shows concern that allied governments were beginning to ask direct questions. To address this, officials drafted talking points designed to minimize suspicion. The files indicate that these talking points were circulated to liaison officers abroad. Analysts reviewing the documents conclude that the messaging was systematic. The goal was to keep partners reassured without revealing the existence of hidden programs. The repetition of similar language across years suggests long-term planning. Declassified communication logs reveal how tightly these campaigns were managed. Instructions on phrasing were transmitted from central offices to field units. One entry stresses that discrepancy between local and central accounts must be avoided. This demonstrates coordination across multiple levels of command. The practice ensured consistency, reducing the chance of accidental disclosure. Such uniformity across regions indicates a centrally directed effort, not isolated improvisation. Financial notes from the same period confirm resources were dedicated to these activities. Budgets list modest but regular allocations for information security briefings. The terminology is generic, but annotations link them to the campaign. Reviewers point out that the consistency of this funding over years signals institutional support. It was not a temporary measure tied to a single incident. Instead, it became part of the operational framework for managing the subject. The files also record evaluations of effectiveness. Summaries note that certain cover explanations gained broad acceptance in media reporting. Others are flagged as less successful, requiring adjustment in future briefings. These evaluations reveal that officials tracked public response as carefully as they tracked material recovery. The effort was not only about denial but about measuring and refining narrative control. Analysts interpret this as evidence of an organized information campaign. Notes from liaison meetings add another dimension. Allied representatives were often given simplified explanations of unusual events. One file states plainly, "Discussion concluded with attribution to weather activity." These summaries confirm that allies were managed with the same tactics as domestic audiences. By standardizing explanations, the U.S. maintained control over how incidents were understood internationally. The documents show little evidence of trust or openness, even with close partners. The tone of some internal memos reveals awareness of the strategy's ethical weight. A few reviewers comment on the risks of deliberate misattribution. Yet, the recommendations consistently favor maintaining the campaign. The argument is framed as protecting national security and avoiding public destabilization. The ethical reservations are noted but not acted upon. The decision to continue reflects a clear institutional priority for secrecy over transparency. Comparisons between official statements and archive notes expose the alignment. Public dismissals often repeat phrases lifted directly from the internal talking points. The uniformity of language demonstrates how the disinformation campaign extended to every level of communication. Even minor incidents were managed through the same template. This degree of control could only have been achieved with coordination and persistence. Taken together, the documents show that denial evolved into disinformation. What began as silence became a program of managed explanations. Journalists, allies, and the public were all given controlled narratives. The files mark this as a deliberate shift rather than a gradual drift. With the campaign in place, concealment no longer relied only on denial. The next section of the archive turns to the physical traces left behind, the crash sites and the debris that kept fueling the hidden effort. Field logs from the archive describe retrieval missions in remote terrain. The entries are concise, noting dates, coordinates, and cargo weights. Several refer to scorched impact zones documented with photographs now withheld. Teams were instructed to secure debris under sealed orders before any local authority could intervene. Transportation records show the material was moved by air to restricted storage sites. Containers are listed only by size and mass, with no content description. The uniform handling demonstrates standardized procedure across incidents. Witness statements embedded in the files provide added context. Locals described unusual lights followed by explosive impacts. Others reported scorched ground and metallic fragments scattered across fields. These reports were not included in official press releases, which cited weather balloons or conventional aircraft accidents. The contrast between public explanations and archive testimony is consistent with the broader pattern of concealment. The accounts were preserved internally but denied externally. In several cases, official follow-ups listed mundane causes for the events. One document attributes a crash to a training exercise mishap. Another cites meteor activity, despite field teams documenting metallic debris. Analysts reviewing the archive note the persistence of this pattern. Public explanations were chosen regardless of what the internal reports contained. This indicates a predetermined approach rather than genuine investigation. The archived material fills the gaps left by the public narrative. Cargo manifests confirm that the debris was consistently transferred to central facilities. Annotations mark the shipments as priority, sometimes under emergency codes. The speed of movement suggests urgency far beyond routine recovery of wreckage. In one file, handwritten notes state, "Deliver direct to vault." The use of this phrase matches earlier records describing controlled storage of advanced materials. The link between field recovery and vault storage becomes unmistakable. Maps included in the archive show a distribution of sites across remote regions. Locations range from desert terrain to forest clearings, often far from population centers. The choice of sites may explain why incidents remained manageable and contained. Yet witness reports still surfaced, forcing officials to issue cover explanations. The recurring presence of scorched zones suggests a common type of event, though the files avoid speculation. The geographic spread points to long-term tracking rather than random anomalies. Photographic descriptions in logs add more detail. Teams noted fragments with irregular surfaces, sometimes fused as though melted. Other pieces were crystalline or layered in ways unfamiliar to the observers. Reports often include remarks on material hardness or resilience to field tools. Despite these observations, public summaries made no mention of unusual features. Instead, explanations emphasized conventional debris. The separation of accounts shows systematic filtering of information. One log stands out for its precision. It details a recovery operation lasting 12 hours, with material loaded into 7 containers. Soil samples were taken from the impact site, with notes of persistent anomalies. Yet the corresponding public record attributes the event to a small aircraft crash with no survivors. The discrepancy illustrates how the disinformation campaign and retrieval program functioned together. Internally, detailed evidence was preserved. Externally, it was erased from acknowledgement. Analysts examining the archive stress that the repeated retrievals demonstrate continuity of interest. Despite official denials, field teams returned again and again. Material was collected, transported, and locked away without interruption. This was not a series of isolated accidents but a sustained program of response. Each log strengthens the conclusion that the phenomenon was actively tracked. The debris became a central feature of the hidden archive. The files close with references to ongoing transfers into the late 1990s. Shipments continue to appear even as official programs were declared defunct. The endurance of these actions proves that interest never ended. It only shifted deeper into secrecy. With debris secured and narratives managed, the archive turns next to internal doubts. There, a reassessment begins, questioning whether the policy of strict secrecy still served national interest. By the late 1990s, the tone inside the files changes. Memos show senior officials debating whether the policy of silence could continue indefinitely. Some argued that keeping the material hidden no longer served national interest. Others warned that disclosure would undermine decades of carefully built denials. The language is cautious but clear. There was recognition of fracture within the system. These debates reveal that even inside the classified world, consensus was no longer firm. One memo records a proposal for limited release of information. The idea was to acknowledge unidentified aerial phenomena in general terms while keeping material studies concealed. Advocates believed this would relieve pressure from journalists and allies without exposing the deeper programs. The proposal, however, was never enacted. Notes in the margin state simply risk outweighs benefit. The archive ends the trail of this proposal with no further reference. Other documents reveal growing concern over leaks. Analysts warned that recurring witness reports and foreign inquiries increased the chance of exposure. A report dated 1998 advises expanding the disinformation campaign to preempt these risks. The recommendation was to intensify narrative control rather than scale it back. This choice demonstrates how institutional inertia favored secrecy even as doubts grew. The apparatus was maintained despite recognized vulnerabilities. Review summaries from this period emphasized the accumulated evidence already held. They list restricted material studies, crash site recoveries, and coordinated cover strategies. The language resembles a stock-taking exercise, as if weighing what could be risked and what must remain locked away. Some passages describe decades of continuity in these programs. Others caution that disruption of this continuity would destabilize trust inside the defense establishment. The hesitation is evident in every line. Financial documents from the same years show the program's quiet persistence. Off-book allocations continued under coded designations. The funding amounts remain steady despite the debate over disclosure. This consistency suggests that while officials questioned policy, operational commitment never faltered. Material was still studied, retrieved, and stored. The contradiction between financial continuity and policy doubt defines this period. One archive note captures the mood of uncertainty. It describes growing difficulty reconciling internal knowledge with external posture. The phrase stands as testimony to the widening gap. Officials acknowledged the burden of maintaining parallel realities. Yet no decisive change followed. Instead, the policy of secrecy endured, even as its rationale weakened. These files show the tension of a system unwilling to alter course. Analysts reviewing the material see this as the first real sign of internal fracture. The documents do not suggest collapse, but they do reveal hesitation. For decades, the program had advanced without visible debate. By the late 1990s, that certainty was eroding. Questions were asked about cost, necessity, and national interest. The answers favored continuity, but the existence of the questions marked a turning point. The reassessment closes without resolution. Disclosure was considered but shelved. Secrecy remained intact, supported by funding and reinforced by habit. Yet the cracks recorded in these files remain important. They show that absolute control was not unchallenged, even inside the system. The archive leaves this moment of doubt hanging, then moves forward. The next set of documents exposes the hidden money trail that kept the program alive long after public inquiries faded. Financial ledgers from the archive expose the infrastructure behind the hidden program. The entries are coded, routed through defense contracts with generic project titles. None mention aerial phenomena directly. Instead, allocations appear under vague headings such as materials research or systems evaluation. The sums are modest compared to large-scale weapons programs but recur year after year. This quiet regularity signals institutional commitment. The persistence of funding kept the program functioning without attracting scrutiny. Cross-checking contract numbers reveals a consistent pattern. Certain companies received repeated subcontracts despite no public record of related projects. The ledgers show payments structured in small increments, avoiding large visible transfers. Analysts reviewing the accounts note the deliberate design. It made the program financially invisible while ensuring steady support. No single payment would attract review, but together they represent decades of continuity. Some annotations in the margins provide context. One entry states, allocation approved under legacy code. Another mentions transfer from contingency fund. These notes indicate that even when budgets shifted, the program was protected. The flow of money adapted to changes in administration or policy. By embedding the costs inside other accounts, officials avoided external oversight. The financial trail demonstrates resilience within the system. Reports from auditors inside the classified network confirm awareness of the practice. One memo notes, long-term continuation of coded allocations with no termination clause. Another points out that program scope remains undefined in open record. The language is restrained but telling. Auditors flagged the irregularities without challenging them. Their acceptance suggests the program was sanctioned at a level beyond their review. Oversight was limited by design. In several years, payments increased slightly during periods of reported crash retrievals. Correlation between field operations and funding spikes strengthens the case for a sustained connection. Analysts conclude that the money trail maps directly onto the events already documented. The evidence ties physical retrievals, laboratory studies, and financial support into one continuous structure. The linkage is indirect but consistent. Contract summaries also reveal how the funding was shielded. Companies involved were tasked with unrelated defense work that masked the hidden allocations. One contractor, for example, appears repeatedly in both open aerospace projects and coded entries. This overlap gave cover to the classified charges. No clear separation existed between legitimate contracts and concealed funding. The practice made detection unlikely. The amounts themselves are small in scale but significant in persistence. Unlike experimental programs that vanish after trials, this one shows uninterrupted flow. The modest sums were enough to keep teams, facilities, and storage active. Analysts stress that this continuity is more important than volume. The archive shows that even when public programs ended, money never stopped moving. By the early 2000s, the pattern is still visible. Allocations continue under familiar codes, adjusted for inflation but otherwise unchanged. The trail confirms that the hidden effort survived political turnover and shifting defense priorities. Its quiet endurance reflects institutional intent. The system was built to last, not to fade with changing administrations. These ledgers expose the hidden framework sustaining the program. Material studies, retrieval teams, and disinformation campaigns all depended on this silent funding. The continuity of money ensured that secrecy remained functional. With finances secured, the program endured well past its public counterpart. The archive now turns to more recent echoes, where current acknowledgments of unidentified aerial phenomena intersect uneasily with the legacy of these concealed operations. Recent Pentagon task force reports acknowledge unidentified aerial phenomena but avoid reference to earlier archives. The language used is cautious, emphasizing unresolved observations and inconclusive data. Analysts who compared the reports to older files note parallels in phrasing. Words that once appeared in denial templates, "no evidence of threat," "requires further study," resurface decades later. The continuity suggests that current statements may be shaped by the same principles that guided the past. It indicates acknowledgement without full disclosure. Review of the task force membership reveals another telling omission. Veterans of earlier classified programs do not appear on rosters. Instead, new personnel with no visible connection to legacy archives lead the effort. The absence is significant. It implies compartmentalization, with historical knowledge withheld from the current teams. Analysts interpret this as an intentional separation designed to limit what the new task force can access. The lack of continuity keeps the deeper record out of reach. One report notes the importance of standardizing descriptions of encounters. The instruction echoes earlier directives that stressed uniform public messaging. The recurrence of this tactic shows that the information management model has not changed. Analysts see this as further evidence of institutional continuity. Today's cautious wording is not accidental but consistent with the earlier denial framework. The result is an official record that acknowledges phenomena while minimizing significance. Internal assessments within the task force avoid definitive statements. Instead, they focus on the need for improved sensors and data collection. These technical priorities mirror past recommendations found in the archive. For decades, officials emphasized the lack of sufficient evidence while restricting access to existing material. The pattern continues in modern form. Emphasis on future collection allows past evidence to remain unaddressed. The strategy maintains the cycle without resolution. Comparisons of timelines add weight to the pattern. Modern reports cite recent incidents but omit historical continuity. Yet cross-referencing shows that some recent sightings occurred near locations already documented in earlier field logs. The lack of acknowledgement of this overlap suggests deliberate omission. The public receives a narrative of fresh discovery rather than long-standing observation. This framing sustains the compartmentalization. Reviewers point out that the task force reports avoid reference to recovered material. They focus solely on observational data. This silence stands in contrast to the extensive archive of debris retrievals and laboratory studies. The selective scope reinforces the conclusion that the new effort is insulated. Analysts believe the choice maintains a barrier between present acknowledgement and historical reality. It keeps the most sensitive findings off the record. Some passages in the modern documents are nearly identical to phrasing from the 1990s. The repetition of wording across decades strengthens the impression of template use. Phrases such as insufficient evidence for conclusion recur without modification. Analysts call this a hallmark of controlled narrative. It gives the appearance of openness while ensuring the subject remains unresolved. The echo of past language demonstrates institutional persistence. The compartmentalization has another effect. By excluding veterans of earlier programs, the task force avoids cross-examination of past decisions. New personnel lack access to the full record, limiting their ability to challenge official accounts. This structure ensures continuity of secrecy while projecting limited transparency. It is the same balance seen in the archive from decades before. The method adapts but does not change. These echoes confirm that the divide remains. Official reports now admit unidentified phenomena exist, but they stop short of engaging the deeper archive. The acknowledgement is partial, the concealment intact. What was once denied is now admitted cautiously, with boundaries carefully maintained. The archive closes this section by linking present and past. The unresolved truth remains buried, waiting to resurface in the cycle of disclosure. The final files turn back to where it all began. Fragments of truth surfacing from sealed records, hinting at a buried reality not yet fully seen. The final section of the archive circles back to its beginning. Newly surfaced files confirm a cycle. Fragments of evidence revealed, broader truths withheld. The records recount familiar elements, material studies labeled anomalous, rapid response missions mobilized at short notice, and consistent instructions to deny or redirect inquiry. These pieces form a long narrative of containment rather than resolution. Each disclosure provides a glimpse, never a complete picture. The effect is managed exposure across decades. Documents describe how certain files were deliberately reclassified after brief availability. Notations such as withdraw from open access appear in margins. This practice ensured that only partial evidence entered public record. Analysts conclude that the release of information has been tightly curated, not accidental. What the public has seen are fragments selected to preserve the broader concealment. The larger body of data remains sealed in classified repositories. Some memoranda acknowledge the persistence of rumors and independent reports. Officials assessed these external accounts as a risk but not a decisive threat. A memo from the early 2000s states, "Controlled release preferable to uncontrolled speculation." This line reveals the policy that shaped later disclosures. Small portions were allowed to surface, enough to manage attention, never enough to close the subject. The cycle of half-truths became an enduring feature of the program. Analysts reviewing the archive see continuity across eras. In the 1950s and 1960s, material retrievals were hidden behind denials. In the 1980s and 1990s, disinformation campaigns refined the strategy. In the 2000s and beyond, limited acknowledgments emerged under new terminology. Despite changes in style, the core remained constant. Protect the deeper record. The buried reality persisted through adaptation rather than abandonment. Files also show recognition of what secrecy achieved. One assessment notes program stability sustained through narrative control. Another highlights that institutional continuity maintained despite turnover. These remarks indicate that officials measured success not by discovery, but by preservation of concealment. The archive itself is proof of that success. Decades of secrecy remained intact even as fragments escaped into the open. Physical evidence remains at the center of what is withheld. Laboratory notes on alloys, field logs of debris retrievals, and cargo transfers to restricted vaults all appear throughout the record. None of these details are reflected in public reports. The controlled release strategy ensured that the existence of such material stayed outside accepted history. Analysts point to this omission as the defining marker of the hidden program. The core findings remain locked away. The closing pages emphasize the unresolved nature of the subject. References to ongoing containment appear even in the most recent files. No conclusive statement is offered, only the assurance that secrecy remains operational. This deliberate ambiguity allows the cycle to continue. The truth is never denied outright, but never confirmed fully. The result is a narrative that drifts forward without closure. Reviewers note the consistency of redactions across decades. Sections dealing with origin, purpose, or function of materials are uniformly removed. What remains is evidence of process: recovery, storage, concealment. The absence of interpretation is itself revealing. It shows that officials considered knowledge of existence manageable, but details of meaning unshareable. The design of the archive is to confirm activity while keeping conclusions hidden. The last assessment in the file states simply, "Disclosure incomplete by necessity." The phrase captures the logic that has governed the program for generations. What has surfaced provides enough to suggest reality but not enough to resolve it. The deeper record remains unseen, stored in classified vaults and coded budgets. This is where the archive ends. Not with resolution, but with the recognition that the buried reality still waits, intact, beneath layers of controlled silence.